day of disruption is what they asked for, and a day of disruption is what they got. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets today, marching in droves and blocking access to main roads in order to protest the government's judicial reforms, which they say will weaken the Israeli High Court and give more power to the government. Proponents claim that this gives more power to the people as they elect the representatives. However, protesters claim it is undemocratic as the government can overturn any Supreme Court decision that they do not like. In some areas, the Tel Aviv protest turned chaotic as the police used force, leading to the arrest of dozens of protesters. Leader of the opposition Yair Lapid has urged the police to ignore warnings from National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and to leave the protesters alone, whilst Netanyahu has accused Lapid of sowing anarchy. But is it Netanyahu who has lost control of his government and his country? 14 Israelis have been murdered in terror attacks this year, with new attacks happening almost daily. Should this be the priority instead of judicial reforms? Will these protests actually make a difference, or, after 2 months, have they lost their effectiveness? What will be the aftermath of the day of disruption?
So let's get to it. What would be the aftermath of the day of disruption? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to let out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick it up from there. Carrie, please take the lead.
I think what's going to happen is exactly what was expected, which would be nothing much. Protest leaders hope to, but absolutely do not expect to influence the Knesset. And in fact, both Netanyahu and Levin signaled that they're full steam ahead. Netanyahu, despite the fact that several cross-Knesset senior figures today issued a letter calling for immediate talks, he said basically, we're happy to speak, but this legislation will continue full speed, which is exactly what Levin said. Gantz today basically said a very low chance of this actually happening. I think we're much where we started.
Okay, Yariv Oppenheimer, your thoughts?
Yeah, I believe that the aftermath of this day will be another day of demonstration, much bigger and more escalation of the struggle against the government. This is a yellow card, another yellow card, but eventually there will be also the red card. And the people in the government should understand that this is like the Israeli Tahrir Square. It's not going to be over just like that. There is going to be one winner in this situation, and I don't think it's going to be the government. It's huge, it's enormous, it's energetic, and it's not going to disappear.
Attorney Bar-Yoshafat, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want to say I have a lot of empathy towards the people who are now protesting, because I think they're wrong, but I think it's a horrible feeling to feel like democracy is being taken away from you. But unlike Yariv, I think that he doesn't understand the concept of democracy, which is the will of the people through their elected representatives. I don't think that these propositions are being passed so fast. I think this is the normal pace. I do hope that there'll be more compromises from both sides, so the people in Israel will feel more calm. But I don't see anything. I don't think anything should be stopped because of it.
Okay, and let's feel free to interact from this point onwards. And let's begin with a very clear dichotomy many politicians are trying to set today: anarchy or protest. Bar-Yoshafat.
I don't think they're anarchists, but I disagree with the approach of blocking the roads, and I do feel like I think there's a double standards here, because former President Aaron Barak said that, just because you want to protest, it doesn't mean you can stop the whole country from moving forward. Judge Arbel said the same thing. Attorney General Meni Maznuz said that someone who's blocking the road should be sent to jail for 20 years. So on one hand, I think that people have the right to protest, but to block all of Israel, to block the main roads, I don't think it's a fair thing. It's not the majority of Israel. It's a lot of people. It's not the majority. And when Yariv is saying it's going to be bigger and bigger, I think in the end of the day, it's harming Israel more than we understood the point. I don't think any further actions are going to be useful. It's just harming the people who need to get to work, the people who need to go to the hospital, the people who need to see their kids. It's just harming them.
Okay, we need to remember, first of all, that there wasn't violence today. It was demonstration. They are blocking the roads.
Yariv, have you seen the images?
I saw the reports from the hospital, and you don't have even one policeman that is injured. The only people that are injured are the people that demonstrate. So it wasn't violent. I don't know any car that was put on flame or even not one single glass that was smashed. It wasn't violent. Having said that, this is an unusual situation. It's not that the government is just making a decision about something. This government is going to cancel the basic civil rights of the people. Therefore, in this unprecedented situation, you need to take much harder tools in order to stop it. It's not like the disengagement. It's not like evacuation of outposts. This is much bigger than that, and the only option of the people to keep their basic rights as people in democracy is to do what we saw today.
I think we're missing the point here. I think that what happened today is pretty standard political protesting, but it was compared to something that was completely non-standard, to the settler riot rampage people have said in Hawara on Sunday evening, and that comparison was made by none other than Premier Benjamin Netanyahu less than an hour ago, when he said that both the Hawara riots, which killed a Palestinian and burned property and extensive vandalism, and the protests today in Tel Aviv, which, as you mentioned, Yariv, were pretty restrained, despite the fact that they were quite tense. I was on the ground there most of the day today. Were equivalent in that they, quote, both crossed a red line, which Netanyahu defined as violence and anarchy. Anarchy, of course, being a dog whistle that's been used by far-right elements in this coalition to declaim left-wing protesters. All of that being said, what did Netanyahu also say? He said, take the example of the disengagement, the 2005 Gaza disengagement, which he said, despite the fact it uprooted people from their homes, he very unfactually, I would say, said that it was a quiet, peaceful protest, of course, ignoring the fact that his own government minister, Bezalel Smotrich, in 2005 was held by the Shin Bet on suspicion of planning to explode cars on the Ayalon highway, which, again, today was the center of the protest. So I think that there's a lot of mismatch here. When you say protest, you can mean many different things. When you mean civil disobedience, blocking roads, tense but ultimately non-violent protest versus arson versus murder versus live fire, which we saw on Sunday, completely different situations.
I have to tell you honestly that maybe it's going to be anarchy as well. Not because of the demonstration, because of the legislation. This is not the disengagement. This is not the dismantle of settlements. This is not even an issue about peace and war. This is the basic element of democracy, whether people has the right to feel free in their own state, whether they have freedom of speech, whether they have the Supreme Court keeping their basic rights. And this is why, because the legislation is undemocratic, the response of the people will not be a democratic one. It's a totally new game. It's a totally boring game. It's not the regular situation in which a government make one decision that affects some people. This is a decision that will affect everyone, and it will actually cancel the ability of people to say that they are living in a democracy.
Yariv, I think that's terrifying. I think the idea of justifying actual civil war, which is something that politicians right now are predicting, not advocating.
Not violence. Anarchy,
you're saying,
but not violence.
Okay, but the point is that right now, I think it's inappropriate to compare what is happening right now to actual anarchy. What's happening right now is still very much within the bounds of civil disobedience. I think you're saying that people are so enraged that should this platform continue, and it very much all signals will be that it will continue, that this might be the outcome. And of course, I think that's what many people fear in Israel.
Ron.
The problem is that what Yariv is saying is just false. There's no decision to cancel democracy. If there was, then I would understand the fuss. But Yariv is saying, I don't like to lose, because he doesn't understand the concept of democracy. The people who did not...
I'm sorry, I have to stop you right there. You said that in your opening. This idea that the coalition somehow won the ability to completely overhaul Israel's judicial system and democratic way of governance is ridiculous to me, especially because... No, I'm sorry, I'm speaking. Especially because they won by a slim majority of about 30,000 to 40,000 votes, when you take into account the fact that we also have a chus chasima, we have an electoral threshold, and a number number of votes were thrown out. This was not a large sweeping mandate. More than that, Likud absolutely did not signal during the election that it planned to pursue this sweeping platform. It put forward one bill that would have given government control judicial appointments, and the only party that actually spoke about it was religious Zionism. What happened is that tons of Likud voters, about 60% of Likud voters, do not support this today because it was unexpected. And I think there's mass protest, what you just said, that this was the right of the elected representatives to do whatever they want.
Okay, let's allow Ron,
Democracy
please.
is not just election.
Yariv, let's allow Ron to speak, please. Yeah.
I just love the fact that I was interrupted, and then she said, hey, please let me finish. So we can agree or disagree about the legal reform. There are a few things that I would like to make straight here. Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz and Gideon Sa'ar, they all knew what the elections are about. Everyone who is a member of the Likud, the Bayit HaYehudi, the religious Zionists, knew what the elections were about. Apparently now it's unknown, number one. Number two, to argue that what they're trying to do now is undemocratic is false. So I want to see the article that you're referring to. In addition, it's a bill proposition that, yes, they want to have limitations on the judicial branch that is taking over the legislative branch and the executive branch. We have American audience listen to us. The proposals are politicians should nominate judges. Oh my God, what a horrible idea. It's not like what you have in America or most of the OECD countries. There's a decision that says if there's if the legislative branch wants to pass a law and they have a 61 plus, then it can pass it, and still the Supreme Court can cancel that law if they have a supermajority. Guess where you
as an American lawyer, I'm happy to educate you as to why those are inappropriate comparisons. One being that the U.S. has a constitution which is very difficult to change. Israel does not. You can change any law with a simple majority of votes. And second, politicians in America do not directly...
You cannot cancel laws. But please educate me about legal stuff. If you don't have a constitution, then the whole case of the Supreme Court is gone, because the whole point of Psak Din Mizrahi is that they said that basic laws are our normative level that's above a regular law. That makes it right to cancel a regular law. So if you want to have a legal debate, that's fair. But don't use false arguments saying no one knew about the legal reform. From 2009, people have been trying to push this reform.
People were very aware of it. People in opposition, politicians, voters overwhelmingly say today, voters for Likud overwhelmingly say that they did not suspect this. They did not anticipate this.
You also say that they're trying to cancel democracy. So I'm sorry for not taking what you're saying. And again, you keep interrupting me.
Democracy.
I agree with you, Yariv. I believe in liberal democracy. Democracy is not just... I don't believe in liberal democracy. Okay,
no,
you're going to announce
this reform.
Maybe you don't know what is liberalism about. Minorities, but you're ignoring the will of the people. You're completely ignoring it. If 80 people would push for this reform, you would still say no, because you want the Supreme Court to have the final word, which is undemocratic. You're voting for tyranny, and when people saying let's have a debate, you're saying I'm not willing to have a debate to shut down the country. You're not pro-democracy. You're pro your own opinions.
Okay. You cannot fool everyone all the time. This is not democracy, because if the majority rules, so the minority, no, enough. The minority has no rights. Who will protect the minority rights? Who will protect the freedom of speech? Who will protect the freedom of the media? Who will protect the freedom of the people that didn't vote for this government? Who should I trust? The prime minister, the ministers, the people that I didn't vote for? In democracy, the will of the people is just one thing. You cannot have democracy with people that
tyranny of the majority or tyranny of the minority. We're taking a break and we're back with more. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Carrie Keller-Lynn, Yariv Oppenheimer, and attorney Ron Bar-Yoshafat. Thank you all so very much for staying with us. And before we go back to our discussion, let's cross now live to our 24 News political correspondent, Batya Leventhal, out and about in Jerusalem. Protests continue. Batya.
Right, Eli, it's the question of the evening. Are the protests going to make or break the government? The opposition protests that are here, as you can see behind me, in full force. They recommend about 4,000 to 5,000 protesters are in fact here on Uzzah Street, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a private residence. They've been here for a couple of hours now. But when we were speaking earlier to some of the protesters, some of them were saying that they're from the middle class and the working class, and that without them working today, today, on a day that they should be, the economy is going to collapse, and thus the government has no chance, or at least no point of return, not to listen to their debate. If you have a look now on the other side, there's been police brackets being set up in front of his house, but also all throughout Jerusalem. Earlier, we tried to speak to some of the police who, some of them do actually support the legal reforms, saying that they do believe that the judiciary in Israel does need to be reformed, but not necessarily in agreement with how it is being reformed at the moment. We do know that negotiations at the moment between the opposition and the coalition don't seem very much to be coming to the table. Will it make or break the government is going to be the next question. Benjamin Netanyahu addressing this tonight, but sort of shying away from the negotiations as well as the judicial reforms, and speaking purely on the protests that are happening here tonight, and a day that has been completely disruptive in his view across the state of Israel. Eli.
I-24 News political correspondent Batya Leventhal, thank you so very much for your reporting throughout the day. So let's get to it. As Batya put it, will the judicial reform make or break the Benjamin Netanyahu government? Another quick fire round, and we pick it up from there. Bar-Yoshafat, please take the lead.
Again, I want to say I have empathy for the people who are protesting, and I think that their voices should be heard. But what is the message that the public should understand if the government is unable to pass a reform because of the protest? How does that make the people of South Tel Aviv feel? How does that make the people of the Negev feel? How does that make the people who were kicked out of their homes in a disengagement feel? It means, oh, we did not shout strong enough, we did not block enough roads, so the government did not agree to listen to us. That is not a civil discourse. A civil discourse takes place in the legislative branch committees.
Carrie?
I think this reform is absolutely necessary for the continuation of this government. In fact, this government was formed partially on the premise of passing this reform, with each party in this government wanting it for separate reasons. One is, Ron mentioned right now, being to right the, quote, wrongs of the disengagement. Another to enable Haredi yeshiva students to not enlist in the military. The question is, what's going to happen after this reform passes? What Israel's system of governance will look like? How people will feel in this country when they don't have protection for their civil liberties?
Or what happened if it is not passing? Yariv, your 30 seconds.
If this coalition will not break over this, the country will break and disintegrate, because we are seeing what is going on. And we heard today that already 2 members of the Knesset from the Likud are calling for stopping the legislation and talking with the other side. So maybe it's a sign that people in the right wing understood that this is something that this government cannot do. Not any government can do. There are some things that government cannot do, like to cancel democracy. And if they are doing so the outcome will be the break of the country.
Okay, and on that note, let's please feel free to interact. I do want to go to circle back to some of the points Batya Leventhal made about the position of police officer, which brings me to ask you, should government employees and security personnel be allowed to protest?
Well, I believe that once they are not in uniform, I believe that they can do and they can come. But this is not the big issue. The big issue will be what will happen if this reform will pass, and then the Supreme Court will cancel it. What side the police, the army will take if the government will ignore the verdict of the Supreme Court? And then we will ask these people, are you on the side of the law or are you on the side of the politicians? And this is a moment that we don't want to go to, but this is where we are heading. Because if this government will legislate, the Supreme Court will cancel it. And then these people that are today on duty, they will have to make the decision whether they are going to listen to the Prime Minister or the head of the Supreme Court.
Ran?
I want to thank Yariv for showing us why we need this legal reform, because according to Yariv Oppenheimer, even if 120 members of the parliament say one thing, but the Supreme Court says something else, he thinks that the police officers should listen to the Supreme Court. Congratulations, Yariv. Yes. You just demonstrated tyranny, because you don't understand. And again, I believe in liberal democracy that protects minorities. But at the end of the day, when you have a clash between the will of the people and people who are not elected, I'm trying to understand why you think people who are not elected should have the final word. Now, if you want to talk about the procedure, I am also calling for both sides. I'm also calling for both sides. I think that for the unity of the people, both sides should make tremendous compromises, because that's what's most important, the unity of the people. But if you're saying at the end of the day they have to listen to the Supreme Court, and you're not willing to have other judges being in the Supreme Court, you're the demonstration why we have to have this reform. You're using democracy. You don't know what democracy is. You're literally pushing for freedom.
It's so simple. Even 120 members of the Knesset cannot take civil and human rights. This is undemocratic. You have the Supreme Court exactly for that, to restrain the majority and to put some red line to the will of the people. If the will of the people tomorrow will be that there will not be any kosher restaurant in Israel at all, not kosher food at all, just non-kosher. Do you think it's democracy?
Members of the parliament say no kosher, there will be no kosher.
The civil rights of the Orthodox religious is to live their own life. No.
The Constitution.
But in America, you cannot
ignore the will of the
America,
people.
you cannot shut down restaurant because you just want it. You have to protect the civil rights.
You can take away people from their home during disengagement.
Okay.
Or you can have a treaty with Lebanon 4 days before the election against a basic law without bringing it to the parliament, because you're on the right side of history. Yariv, you think you're on the right side of history.
No.
You're an example of tyranny. It's equality and democracy. Thank you for showing the true face of what you're saying.
I really hope that there is a limit.
Okay, gentlemen. Carrie Keller-Lynn, will it stay a who will blink first type of a battle? Is there any way to have, to save the grace or save face for both sides and move forward in some way or another?
Ellie, we're definitely still waiting to see. We've seen inching forward in that now politicians from both sides of the debate say, stop everything and we're ready to talk. Of course, they mean different things when they say stop everything. One side means stop the protests, the other says stop the legislation. I think that we are feeling considerably more pressure to get to this point, to the point that a lot of people in the journalism world thought that tonight Netanyahu might have been close to saying he'd be willing to come to some sort of table to start discussing, because of the joint statement that was issued, because of the statements made by the president and by Benny Gantz today that also really highlighted the need to speak. I don't know the way forward. I think that Netanyahu was definitely surprised by the economic pressure on Israel. I think the fact that the rating agency today did not downgrade Israel is definitely going to be a step back from that pressure. Remains to be seen, but there needs to be a bigger boogeyman for this coalition than the boogeyman of not passing this judicial reform.
Okay, Yariv, Ron, we have very little time left, so both of you really quickly wrap it up for us. Where are we heading from here? Yariv, 10 seconds, please.
I think Netanyahu still don't understand what is really going on. He doesn't really aware of the scale of this demonstration. It's not about whether this reform is right or not. The public decided. They are against it. The question will be whether this government will go against the will of the people, and then we will see clashes.
Ron.
The people who did not pass the threshold are saying we're the people. I just want to sum it up like this. There is a concept of gatekeepers and a concept of democracy. Finally, Israel is going towards democracy. It's good for Israel. I hope the reform will pass, even with some changes.
Okay, and on that note, Carrie Keller-Lynn, Yariv Oppenheimer, Ron Bar-Yoshafat, thank you so very much for your time and insight. We appreciate it, and we will see you back on the show.